So now it's time to start to change the axis orientation of these joints. So just to reiterate, the axis orientation is related to the little axis we have. Let me just change the background. There we go. You can see we've got a little XYZ axis inside this, each one of these little spheres that we've created when we're making our joints. And as we go along, some of these will get a little bit messed up. They'll be pointing in odd directions, and we need kind of like a uniform or very standardized way that these should be facing. So generally, if you can help it, your y-axis should be facing up at all times, or in the case of the tail, if the tail was out straight, the y-axis will be facing up, but as it's curled over, the y-axis will be facing kind of internally like that, but it will still be facing upwards of the tail. The ears, the y-axis needs to be facing out the back of the ear, and for the legs, they need to be facing out the front of the legs. The z-axis, as long as it faces outwards in either direction, it's fine. But the biggest one we need to worry about, and not even worry, we just need to keep in mind, is the x-axis of each one of these joints has to face down to the next joint in the chain, unless you come to an end of a joint chain and then you just send it off in its in the flow of the object. We'll go over that in a minute. So to access these joints orientations in each one of these, we need to change the way we actually interact with our joints. And if we go up here to these three menus here, this one in the middle is our standard object selection. The one to the right of it is our component selection, and then when we click this, we'll get a new option, a new group of options up here. And the one we want to click is a little question mark, because we're basically asking what is this, essentially. So this is what I get. And at first, yeah, it is just a cacophony of crazy shapes. So we just need to make a bit more sense of these objects. And now you can see what I'm saying about the y-axis. Across the back, it's facing up. And for the most part, most of these axes are facing the right direction. The x-axis needs to be facing down to the next joint in the chain, and it only really never applies when it won't be doing that, I should say, when we get to the end of any joint chain. So you can see here that these two are facing in the wrong direction, these two here, and then these two here are facing in the wrong direction. Actually, no, they're facing in the right direction. Oh, they just need to be altered a little bit. They just need to be rotated around like that. So my ear on the left needs to be sorted, my eyes need to be sorted, my end of my jaw needs to be sorted, these two joints here need to be sorted, and this joint here needs to be sorted. So for the most part, it's fairly, and my joint there needs to be sorted. It's a fairly easy process. Okay. Biggest one is just to remember the x-axis needs to point towards the next joint down the chain, and the z-axis needs to be pointing out to the side. And if you just do those two things, everything tends to fall into place quite quickly. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to find all the joints at the end of a chain that aren't facing in the correct position, and I'm going to go around and alter those. So let's go for the tail. So the tail needs to be altered. So I'm just going to rotate that around so that the x-axis, if I go from the side, it'll make more sense. As the tail's coming around, this last axis is pointing in the direction of the flow, so that way. And I'm going to have to rotate another around the x-axis just to move this y-axis to face inwards, like that. Because if this was laid flat, then the y-axis should be facing upwards, and to do that I need to face that one. So it gets a little bit confusing, but once you do it a few times it'll make complete sense. So these two, the x-axis is facing in the right direction, but I just need to rotate them around. I should also say as well that it's best to have, if I just click my hammer here for my tool settings up in the top right corner, I want to have my rotation orientation set to object, at least for most of this. Sometimes we might have to change it, but for the most part this is what we need, because we have to rotate around the object's orientation. So I'm going to rotate that around so the y-axis face inwards, like that. Oh, went a bit over the top. There we go. So there I'm holding J to snap to the 15-degree increments. So as you can see there, these are now facing around. They're all kind of flowing in the right flow. Let's follow the back. And we can see here the root object is facing in the wrong direction. It's kind of facing to the left a tiny bit and upwards, downwards I should say. So now I just want to grab this and move it into position so the x-axis is pointing up the spine. So there is going to be a change of angle here in the root. Into the tail it's going to be pointing out of the tail, and in the root here it's going to be pointing down the spine. So let's travel down the spine even more. When we get to this joint, we can see that that's not in the right orientation itself. This is the spine 4 joint. So I'm just going to rotate that around until that's also facing down to the next joint in the chain. Good. Done that. And the head is fine. So this last one in the head chain, I need to move around until it's facing like that. Good. So the x-axis is facing in the flow of our object. Let's just rotate that spine forward a tiny bit. There we go. So now I'm going to go down to the jaw. I'm just going to rotate this so it's facing in the direction that the joints are going, like that. And the two eye joints here, they need to be facing, they absolutely need to be facing out straight. So I've made them as straight as I could. Dog barking in the background. So the x-axis needs to be pointing in the direction of the eyes, essentially. So if I look at my ears as well now, I can see that these on the left are more or less perfect, except this one at the base needs to be flipped around. But these on the left are quite off, but not crazy off, because we can just rotate, we can grab all of them. Oh, let's just grab these top 3 instead, and we can rotate them around until the x-axis is facing down the chain. And then this axis here needs to be pointing that way as well. So both the base joints need to be facing basically the opposite direction. The Zs need to be facing with the rest of the Zs that are going to our left. So if I rotate them round, there we go. So the y-axis are now facing out the back of the ear. Again, there's kind of like an inherent flow to the object that might be very confusing at first, but trust me, the more you do this, or the more you just kind of like, you don't worry about it too much, the quicker you'll understand these layouts. All you've got to realise, all you've got to think is X needs to be pointing towards the next joint in the chain, and your Z axis needs to be pointing out in one direction, out to the sides, like that. Okay, so now I can grab my 2 feet and rotate them round. Make sure you're grabbing the axis in the middle. Let's see if they're pointing in the right direction. So they're pointing a little bit off. Can rotate them around again. There we go. Nice. And when it comes to the feet, they need to be pointing across the ground. So this front foot is pointing down through the ground. So if we bring back our grid, it's pointing below the center line. What we need is for the joint of the foot with the very toe tip needs to be pointing parallel to the ground. So it needs to be pointing out forward. So these two at the very bottom here. So let's grab my 2 toes at the front, and just they need to get rotated around to the facing like that. Good. So again, most of the joints of the leg are facing, if I'm looking from the front, they're facing to the left, but there are two rogue joints here, so I just need to rotate around. So I'm going to do that again. There we go. So the Z's of the leg are facing to the left. If we're looking at the creature from the front, anyway, they're facing to the left. So the two shoulder joints here, we need to rotate around them so the X is facing towards the next joint of the chain. Yep. And that one, yep. So that's the biggest one to remember. Just remember that the joints need to be facing to the next joint in the chain. So these two here, these two knees, they need to be rotated around, because again, most of the joints of the leg are facing to the left. If we're looking at the creature from the front, they're mostly facing to the left, so I need to just make those face to the left a bit more. And I think that's it. So remember, the rules are each joint needs to have the x-axis pointing towards the next joint in the chain. The z-axis needs to be pointing off to the side, and that will naturally move the y-axis in the correct position. Oh, so I need to grab that back leg there, move it into place like that, and then flip it round like that. So the y-axis is facing forward for the legs. Same for the top here. So you can see there for my leg, most of the joints are facing to the left, so I need to move that joint round to the left like that. Okay. So those are the rules. The x-axis needs to be pointed directly to the next joint in the chain. The y-axis always needs to be facing up or forward of a joint. And the z-axis needs to always be facing out to the left. Oh, not necessarily facing out to the left, but facing out to the side. The tail axis are facing out in the opposite direction, because at the root joint, literally the joints are going in the opposite direction, so the orientation is set to the opposite direction. It's a lot of information to take in, but if you just take your time, do not get stressed about it. It'll make complete sense in time. Obviously, this is the first time that a lot of you have been doing it, so there's no reason to get super stressed about it. Okay, cool. See you in video 3.